Hi, welcome to Simple SQL. Today we're going to talk about views. If you don't already have it open, open Management Studio, get connected to your local instance of SQL Server, and open a new query window. Let's go ahead and point our query window at our database, right there. And let's take a look in our database. So the table that we want to look at is the one that we imported during our last episode. And we've got a bunch of sales data inside our sample table here. And now what we want to do is we want to make a view, or possibly several views, to look at this data in different ways. A view is a saved query. Now there are a couple of different reasons that you might want to make a view. One reason might be for security, so you can give someone permission to a view without giving them access to the underlying tables. Another reason might just be for convenience. So if there's the same query that you run all the time, you might want to make a view out of it instead of having to constantly open up a saved query file or retype it. So let's think about what might we want to see in our sales data. I think something that might be important is to see the sales data by item. So let's go select star from sample and take a look at the data that we have in there. All right, so we've got an item name and we've got a quantity and price, but it looks like in our data we also have this item total over here, which should be our quantity times our price. All right, so let's go ahead and say, let's select my item name. And something you'll notice is that there's a space in the item name and in the item total here. And because there's a space in it, we're going to use these square brackets around it. If you don't do this, SQL Server will interpret the space to mean that you're moving on to another thing. So because the file that we imported had spaces in the column names, we're going to have to put square brackets around those. Now let's also use a scalar function, and this is one we haven't talked about yet, but it's one called sum, which sum just means to add things up, right? So we're summing those values together, and if you've done anything in Excel, you're probably familiar with that. So let's sum our item total. And now you may recall that if we're using a scalar function, which only returns a single result, that if we want to see the item name, we're going to have to group, right? So let's group by item name. All right, and now this is actually going to fail, okay? And the reason this is going to fail is because our item total is a varchar. Now, you could have corrected this on the import, but let's go ahead and look and see what it says about this. All right, so operand data type varchar is invalid for the sum operator. So it's saying that we can't add together text fields. So how do we fix that? Well, we've got this handy command here called convert. So we're going to say convert to integer and then our column. All right, so now because of the way these are placed, it's just like when you're doing math. There's a order of operations based on these parentheses here. So my convert statement is inside the sum parentheses, and then its arguments are inside there. So these things happen in order. The first thing that happens is the item total is converted to an integer, and then we add those integers together, right? So when we try this, okay, cool. We now have our items, and we have how much we sold them for, but we don't have a column name on this. Now, you may remember that we can alias tables by putting a space and then what we want the alias to be. We can do the same thing with columns, right? So we can put a space and then tell it what we want it to be. And it may be cleaner or more understandable to you if you type as, and that's also okay. So SQL Server, you can either type the column or function that you want as the name, or you can just put the name. Let's do it with the as there to make it a little bit more readable. And now we can see that we've got our item name and we've got our total. Okay, well, let's see also how many of each item we sold. You may remember count is one good way to do that. So we'll say, actually, you know what? We've got a quantity column. Let's add that together instead. So let's go sum convert int quantity. Right? And this will be our quantity. And you'll notice that because I'm performing functions on this, it's not bringing in the name quantity, right? Because this value here isn't the quantity. It's a quantity converted to the integer and then summed together. So if I don't specifically tell it to call it quantity, much like when I didn't tell it what to do with the item total, it won't give me a column name. So there we go. Now we've got the item name, the total of the sales, and the quantity of items sold. Great. So now what if we wanted to save this as a view so that we can pull this up anytime we want? How would we go about that? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It is create view and then the view name. I like to start my views with VW underscore, and I'll get into more about why in just a minute. But let's call this view sales by item. And then we say as, and then the query. So what we've got here is create view, the view name, as, and then the query that we want. Let's go ahead and run that. Okay, and now what we can do is we can say select star from view sales by item. And this is the reason I like to put the VW underscore, because what you'll notice here is this is the exact same way that you query a table. So by putting the VW underscore at the beginning of the view name, you always know if you're querying a view or you're querying a table. So let's see how that looks. All right, and that looks exactly the same as when we just ran the query up here, okay? So let's go ahead and make a couple more views for our data. Let's do one where we look at it by the country and state that we ship it to. So let's go select the ship state and the ship country. And the sum of, you know what, I'm just going to copy and paste this stuff because I want the exact same stuff. Let's do that. From sample. All right, and then we're going to need to group that. And you'll remember that we can group by multiple columns if we want to. So I'm actually going to group these in a specific order though. And the order is important when you're grouping. So I'm going to group by the ship country first, and then by the ship state. Okay, and so why would the order be important? Well, it's not important if you just leave it like this. However, if you wanted to add anything, so there are additional things that you can do with a group by, and one of those is with Rollup. And what with Rollup means is it gives you rolling totals, but from the furthest item in and then back. So if I say group by country, state with a Rollup, what will happen is it will give me a Rollup value for all of Canada first here, right? And my Rollup value comes with a null state. And then I get a Rollup value for Germany, which there was no state listed for our German shipments, so it is the same as the single element there. And then I get a Rollup value for the United States, so this value is equal to all of these values added together. And then I get a Rollup value for the entire thing. So this 1350 with 120 items, that is the total of all of my countries and states added together, right? So my United States plus my Germany plus my Canada, those three numbers added together come out to that 1350 there. Okay, so let's go ahead and create another view for this. Let's call this create view VW sales by state. All right, and then we have to say as. We'll select that and run it. Okay, and let's check how that looks. All right. Okay, and perfect. Looks exactly how it did when we just ran the query. And so that is the basics of views. In the next episode, we're going to do an introduction to Power BI so that we can get some visualizations for this view data that we have and maybe gain some more insight into our sales data. Thanks for joining me, and I'll talk with you later.